of the World Trade Organization in just a moment, but it is now my pleasure to call on Tidjane THIAM. You all know this gentleman. He's a trailblazer in both the public and private sector. So, and I'm going to ask you to pick up the mic next to you. I think it's appropriate to start with the Africa that you see today, given your experience, Tidjane, in public and private sector, your trailblazing leadership again that we celebrate today. Tidjane.
Hello, Maureen. Mr. President, Yassine Bey, Mr. Adesina, President Alain Boussibe, Minister of Finance, Honorable Ministers, Prime Minister, President of the National Assembly, all participants, it's a particular pleasure for me to be here today in Lomé, Togo, a beautiful city, full of very attractive infrastructure for this discussion. I have to say that infrastructure has always been close to my heart. When I was in Côte d'Ivoire in the 90s, basically most of my work was devoted to infrastructure because I think, as has been said this morning, that the alpha and the omega of everything we do has to be our populations, the people, the young people of Africa, the women, the men of Africa, and that life is just too tough in too many places on the continent today. And infrastructure is an absolutely key part of improving the livelihood of Africans and giving them economic opportunity. So airports, we believed a lot then in bringing private capital to develop infrastructure. One of the first projects I did was the privatization of the airport in Abidjan. I'm sure many of you have visited it. We did some power plants, privately financed, the Acito power plants. We did the third bridge of Abidjan, which some of you may have traveled on. And actually with the support of the ADB, I have to say it was critical. We signed the closing at the top floor of the ADB in Abidjan. All that to say that I've been for a long time a practitioner and a believer in infrastructure and the key role of infrastructure in development in Africa. And so I'm really pleased. For me, it's a bit of a dream come true to be in a meeting like this because in the 90s, I was kind of a sole voice advocating all these ideas, and to see them now picked up across the continent gives me great hope and great optimism for the future.
Well, it's a dream come true to be sitting here with you today in terms of your esteemed career. Prudential, the CEO there of Credit Suisse, and certainly as executive chairman now in terms of freedom acquisition. You have transformed many landscapes across the African continent. And I think the key today is to really try and capture your insights on how we mobilize capital that is blended, that is diverse, and that is innovative for the infrastructure that you refer to, that you are passionate about. Tidjane.
Well, thank you. I'd like to point to a few things which have been mentioned by speakers this morning. And I would start with really original thinking and innovation. It's really, really important because we start from behind. And we can only catch up and win if we do better maneuvers, if we think better, if we act better, if we act faster. When we were doing the Acito power plant, James Wolfenson was the president of the World Bank. And when we closed, he said, if you inaugurate this factory before 18 months, I will personally come to Abidjan for the opening. And I must say, we completed it early. As Anna said, we too rarely associate the words 18 months and early in the same sentence in Africa. So it comes with delay. So it was great to finish early. And he kept his word. He came to Abidjan to see the opening. And my biggest pride was that this was developed by African engineers, by African brains, by African minds. We have enough intelligence on the continent to design solutions to our own problems, and nobody's better placed than us to know what we need and then do it effectively. So that has been a fight of all my life, And I start with thinking, the quality of thinking. I worked a lot in Asia in my career, and I learned a lot from the way they approach problems. And I think one thing that characterizes what people do in Asia is that self-belief, that self-confidence, that they can solve their own problems.
Can we pick up on that theme, on Asia and Africa, and the opportunity that we see there, that you see there?
Yes, a few important points for me, and I'm really pleased that there's going to be a signing today, because I really believe that the key provider of long-term capital to the economy is basically the pension industry. Many of you know that BlackRock has no money, Carlyle has no money. All they do is manage pension fund money. You need to really understand that the first source of long-term capital in all the developed countries are the pension funds. And I really think that a missing element in our development strategies is the creation of long-term institutional investors. We happen to have a very positive demography in Africa. And I made this speech to the authorities in Indonesia, and it worked. I said, look, set up pension funds. Okay? From the small contributions of a population which is young, you are going to develop very significant pools of capital. And this is something that we absolutely must do in Africa, and it was critical also in Asia in providing long-term capital. Because with all respect, banks are good to make loans, but what's needed mostly is equity. Not to get too technical, but really the limiting factor is equity. What we need is high quality equity capital, patient capital, which then allows you to leverage. So for example, to leverage and get the debt. And just as an illustration, when I was doing the third bridge in Abidjan, we couldn't find the last tranche of equity. You know who provided it? The pension fund of the army. I went to see General Koulibaly, who was the head of the pension fund, and I said, look, we need to pay the pension of these people in 20, 30 years. What you need is a cash generative asset that you're going to use to face this liability. And I must say, it was one of the few times we had a general at the signing of a financial agreement at the ADB. He came in full regalia, full uniform, and I'm very happy that that bridge is paying some of the pensions of the soldiers who work very hard for the nation. So that's just one concrete example to say that.
Tidjane, as we continue on your concrete example, do we need the regulatory environment with regards to pension funds to change across the Africa spectrum so that we can deploy this pool of long-term patient capital?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And we need to encourage the pension funds to make those types of investments in equity, high-quality equity investments, which are going